There's a big scandal in Washington over a leaked Signal chat. Now look, basically the Signal chat included Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and they had communications on how to attack the Houthi terrorists. Little did they know, someone had also inadvertently added a journalist with The Atlantic to the chat. And there's a lot that's being left out of the discussion surrounding the Signal chat. I'll be going into some of the details on that today because, frankly, you're not being told, I think, half the story. In other news, the taxpayer-funded programs to give free housing to illegal immigrants, while not only was it happening, it's been exposed now, and it's now being brought to an end by the Department of Housing and Urban Development Secretary Scott Turner. Also, if you ever use 23andMe to find your ancestry data, well, you might want to delete your data there very soon because the company's going bankrupt and there are warnings that they're planning to sell off all of that data. So unless you want some unknown company buying your DNA data, delete it now. We're going into that. We're going to these topics and more today. Let's get started. All right, first off, look, the latest scandal in Washington, and there'll probably be another one, I don't know, tomorrow or next week, but there's scandals all the time. The latest one is a Signal chat. This is a private communication app, uses some degree of security. This one included Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. They were having discussions on, getting clearance to launch attacks on the Houthi terrorists. And it turned out that the media, The Atlantic, just published a story on it. An investigation started. How did The Atlantic get this story? Who leaked it? And then the head of the company actually published online saying that someone inadvertently added him to the chat. Now, Mike Waltz has come out and taken full responsibility for it, saying that he was the one who added The Atlantic to it. And there's now an investigation into that. But the incident has now turned into a debate on, well, are these secure communications? Was a law broken? Well, we'll find out. But what's being left out of the discussion is something very important. I'd say Signal, this private, communication app, it is actually approved for government and even some military communications. It comes pre-installed on their devices and they're actually told to use it. This is where things are at currently. We'll start from the top. Epoch Times said this: President Donald Trump on Tuesday defended National Security Advisor Mike Waltz after the Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg was added to a Signal chat with other high-level administration officials. Trump said he still backs Waltz, he's not backing off from that, a former Republican congressman, as some House Democrats suggested that administration officials be fired over the incident. Maybe also people who have private servers and things like that. I don't know, I'm just saying, right? But in response to questions about Walz's status inside the White House, Trump told NBC News in a phone interview on Tuesday that Michael Waltz has learned a lesson, and he's a good man, adding that Goldberg's presence in the chat had no impact at all. Now it says, when asked how Goldberg was added to the chat, Trump said, "It was one of Michael's people on the phone. A staffer had his number on there." And so that's how a mistake happened. Now, notice that Trump also said he is confident in his staff and team, saying that Goldberg's addition to the chat was the only glitch in 2 months, and it turned out to not be a serious one. Now, some Democrats, it says, suggested that administration officials should be punished or fired. And they're making a big scandal out of this, actually, trying to target them. Now, there's a debate in Congress over this. Top intelligence officials with the Trump administration, they were testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee on Tuesday. And, this was not technically about the Signal chat, but it turned into a conversation about the Signal chat. Criticisms of this were mainly along partisan lines. It was mostly the Democrats grilling these officials over the Signal chat. And the media was, of course, using that to publish stories. But while it's become a new political scandal, well, it does not seem this will lead to Trump officials actually being punished or fired, if you give my take on it. Now, House Speaker Mike Johnson came out in defense of the officials on the chat, saying they should not face any kind of discipline for it. But on a more serious end, there is the debate of, well, could this have led to government secrets being leaked to countries like Russia or China? Questions were going into, how government employees were using Signal as their go-to place for private conversations. And that opened up a whole other big topic, because guess what? The elephant in the room, folks, I'm saying it here, Signal is approved for government communications. There's no scandal here. Signal is even encouraged. It comes pre-installed on their phones. It's even approved for some military communications. Now they're investigating it now. Now they're putting out alerts on it. But going back to like 2017, this has been normal and encouraged. CIA Director John Ratcliffe said that Signal comes loaded on government work devices and it is an approved tool for government communications. He made these statements yesterday during a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing on the worldwide threats. Watch this.
So that we're clear, one of the first things that happened when I was confirmed as CIA Director was Signal was loaded onto my computer at the CIA, as it is for most CIA officers. One of the things that I was briefed on very early, Senator, was by the CIA records management folks about the use of Signal as a permissible work use. It is. That is a practice that preceded the current administration to the Biden administration. It is permissible to use to communicate and coordinate for work purposes, provided, Senator, that any decisions that are made are also recorded through formal channels.
Now, the irony with this congressional hearing and the debates we're now seeing on this is that, look, most members of Congress, I'd guarantee most people sitting there, they very likely know Signal is approved for government communications. And why is that? Why would they possibly know? It's because the U.S. Senate approved Signal for staff communications back in 2017. They actually approved it. Back to 2017, I guarantee some of those same individuals even voted for it. And Signal is even authorized for use of the U.S. military. In fact, in 2020, deployed U.S. troops, meaning they're deployed, they were told they could use Signal on their government cell phones as a way to communicate while on deployment, not even like stateside. Now, the legacy media also likely knows this as well. In fact, during Trump's first term in office, it was revealed government employees in the Trump administration, other people around him, were using Signal to have communications outside the review of Trump and his administration. In 2017, in fact, Vanity Fair even detailed how government employees were using Signal to communicate, and they were actually applauding it like trained SEALs, saying, look at these government officials bypassing Donald Trump to facilitate government leaks. Why was this praised back in 2017 but criticized now? Vanity Fair said this. This is their exact article, 2017, quote, more than a month into his presidency, Donald Trump is still struggling to staunch the constant flow of leaks emanating from his White House. Even attempts to crack down on the leaks have predictably leaked. Last week, Politico reported Sunday, while House Press Secretary Sean Spicer decided to conduct a surprise phone check on his staff after information that was discussed in a closed-door planning meeting with a dozen of his staffers made its way to the press. And it said this, quote, the rising tide of panic among both leakers and leak hunters within the White House has apparently led to something of a technological arms race, as many within Trump world turn to encrypted messaging apps to communicate with reporters and with each other, incognito. It says WhatsApp, Wicker, Signal. Wicker is very similar to Signal. It has an automatic delete function as well, as do these apps, and they're encrypted, meaning you can't just break into them. And Confide, another one, are just some of the more popular programs that have recently begun to become more mainstream as people seek out ways to keep their conversations private. They may also violate the Presidential Records Act, they said, as Spicer warned his team last week. The Trump administration on the other side of this, according to multiple sources in the room. Get that? Multiple sources in the room. This is a leaked article about leaks happening within the Trump administration about concerns of leaks. Now look, again, Signal was later approved. The Senate literally approved it. The military approved it. It was approved for government communications, pre-installed in their devices. But now they're making a scandal over something that many of them themselves probably approved. But this is also reading, some debates on whether government agencies should have dedicated tools for the communications. Should they have to develop something internally that's not downloadable on an app store like Signal is? Should they have their own government app that, journalists at random media can't download and then accidentally get added to on a government chat? That's the big question, right? Now, what's being left out of the discussion also, though, Signal was built with some U.S. government involvement. Again, I'm a former national security reporter and cybersecurity reporter, and the same organization that oversees a lot of government media, including, for example, Voice of America, had some involvement in the early stages of the development of Signal. Not being discussed, by the way. Now, on this point also, though, both Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe said that no classified material was shared on this Signal chat, now the focus of this whole scandal, but both were still questioned pretty strongly on this. Watch this.
So my communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
Well, Director Gabbard, you are the security executive and set access guidelines for classified information. Did you contact the Defense Secretary or others after this specific military planning was put out and say, hey, we should be doing this in a SCIF?
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then
Signal
if there was no
check.
classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security. Bobbing and weaving and trying to, filibuster your answer.
Now, look, my personal take on this, there's two sides to it. On one side, there's a false debate happening over, can they use Signal for government communications? I guarantee most of the people out there, the journalists, the members of Senate, they know this is approved. Again, the Senate approved it for their own communications back in 2017. They know this. What is the big actual, I think, scandal here, though, is that a journalist was added to a private chat that was discussing national security matters. That actually is a scandal. That is a big deal. And on that, I do assume there's going to be real investigations on that. The important side is this is not like a leak because they say there's no classified information. The chats themselves were not revealing insider baseball type stuff. Going to be investigated probably as well, but still debatable. The big scandal, though, is, who on Matt Waltz's team added this journalist? Why did they add it? Was it done intentionally? What was the intent? There very likely could be a scandal there, and I do think that will be the focus of some of the ongoing investigations. And maybe there's going to be some kind of changes to format of how they or protocol of how they actually run these chats. If you're going to have national security decisions being made, maybe read the names of who's on the chat first. Just saying, right? Maybe there's going to be some requirements on that. I do think that, frankly, this is probably the least damaging way this could have gone down. And, if you're a journalist on these chats, maybe you should have kept your head down a bit longer till you got something a bit juicier. Just saying. But the fact that this got kind of released and exposed so early on actually probably is a good thing because it doesn't happen in the long term. Long term, this could have been a much bigger problem. But now there's probably going to be some investigations into it, and some of those loopholes will probably be closed. Now, in my opinion, this is controversy for controversy's sake, at least when it comes to why is Signal on government phones. Again, Signal is approved and used for government communications, and even for some military communications, and actually even in the intelligence community, it's approved for communications. Not like, spies on the ground, but for a lot of their other communications, it is approved communication. Now, it's been going on like this for a long time. This goes back very far. That whole side, as far as I'm concerned, it's a false debate. But there is a scandal, and the actual scandal is, again, how did a journalist get added to a private chat of this nature? That actually is pretty serious. Now, look, in other news, though, FBI Director Kash Patel, he was also at that Senate intelligence hearing on worldwide threats. Keep in mind that that intelligence hearing was not technically about the whole signal thing. It became that because a lot of the Democrats focused their questioning on that, which, serves the media, right? The main focus of that hearing was on a recent report coming out from within the intelligence community on global threats, China, Russia, terrorists, and so on, right? And other different groups. And Kash Patel gave some previews of what's to come on the terrorist organizations and what they're doing about it. Watch this.
So the priorities at the FBI since I took over have been violent crime and national security, and this speaks directly to national security. The direction for the FBI is to track down any individuals with any terrorist ties whatsoever, whether it be ISIS or another foreign terrorist organization, and now to include the new designations of the cartels down south and elsewhere. So the FBI is utilizing our Joint Terrorism Task Force, which are situated in all 55 field offices. But the key to success there is our partnership with state and local law enforcement who have the ground level intelligence on some of these operatives. And as you've highlighted, we've already shut down numerous threats, and we've identified publicly where permissible these threats and individuals and where they're coming from. And I think the FBI is doing a very good job right now in collecting this information through our interagency process, and we will continue to thwart every bad actor affiliated with a terrorist organization or otherwise.
Now, as he mentioned, they're going to be tracking down any individual with terrorist ties. That does not mean just actual terrorists. That could be individuals who associate with them or work with them or help them in some way. And keep in mind, because of the way that terrorism has now been expanded, that could include cartels. Now, who has ties to cartels? Just about every single gang in the United States, maybe some elected officials, corrupt individuals that get paid off and so on. The cartels, they're big. They run most of the drug trade. And if you understand that most of the drug trade is carried out by drug dealers, well, could they be deemed people with terrorist ties? Now the cartels are deemed terrorists? Well, technically, yes. And that could also include gangs like Tren de Aragua, which again is also designated a terrorist organization. That could also include people who are tied to Hamas or the Houthis. Because again, if you have terror ties, Hamas is a terrorist organization, as are the Houthis. And guess what? Well, activist far-left politics, mostly on the communist and socialist side, a lot of them have ties to a lot of them have ties to Hamas. Now look, that could even include the individuals engaging in domestic terrorism related to the attacks on Tesla. And that's going to open up a very big, interesting can of worms, because guess what? Now, we haven't seen any actual terror designations on, the Tesla attacks, people firebombing them, targeting them, listing them, and so on. We have not seen any charges of, terrorism yet. They're saying it. Trump is saying it. The Justice Department is saying it. Kash Patel is saying it. They haven't yet made charges designating these terrorists. But if they do, because they have said they are terrorist attacks, that could mean anybody associated with that could be deemed a terrorist. And if we take what Elon Musk posted publicly of the 5 organizations on the far left involved with this and the major funders behind it, this could actually take down some major organizations at the grassroots of the far left, which is frankly a pretty big network of anarchists and communists. Now look, all of these could uncover some pretty large networks, and I think we're going to see a lot with this if they actually do what they're going to say, right? Look, we're a little over a month into the Trump administration. They're doing quite a bit already. But frankly, we've watched what many would consider domestic terrorism basically go unpunished for the past 10 years, right? Antifa and stuff like that. We haven't really seen anything or almost anything done against that. They're now saying they're going to do something. We'll wait and see. Now, also on this point, though, it could mean bad news for many of the pro-Gaza protesters on university campuses. Now, these people, they might not get charged with terrorism. They do give support for terrorist groups, including Hamas, including the Houthis, many of them. Some of them make public statements against, the United States. They're saying they want to just, literally destroy Western civilization. Wow, what interesting green card holders we're bringing in. But it could see many of them face deportation. And there's a big debate over that. Can you take someone's green card away for making statements like that? Is that protected speech? If you say you want to destroy Western civilization and you engage in protests on American campuses and organized protests, is that a violation of the law? Well, according to the Constitution, probably not. But where do we draw the line, especially when they're supporting terrorist organizations, especially when they're coming out even openly kind of backing that stuff, and when they're giving statements on attacking and destroying the United States? Where does the line get crossed, right? The Washington Post said this. It said, when federal civil rights attorneys launched investigations in February into whether universities properly responded to anti-Semitism on campuses. Because remember, some of these protesters, they were threatening Jewish students. They were blocking them from going to their classes. They were insulting them, attacking them based on their race and religion. And the universities kind of let it happen, right? It says they noticed something unusual about the marching orders from their bosses at the education department at the federal level. It said an early step in civil rights investigations is always a letter to the university demanding certain information. Typically, it says, the DOE, Department of Education, asks how many discrimination complaints were received and what school officials did in response. But it says the Trump administration told the attorneys working on the cases to also collect the names and nationalities of students who might have harassed Jewish students or faculty, according to documents and 3 attorneys with the Office for Civil Rights who have direct knowledge of the situation and who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the case publicly. It says the attorney said they immediately wondered whether the list was meant as a tip sheet that the administration might use to target or deport foreign students who participated in the protests. Now look, let's go back a couple years. If there were students who were attacking black students on a campus, they were harassing them based on their race, they were insulting them, they were calling them bad names, maybe even threatening them, which is what happened in this case, just it was against Jewish students. Do you think the DOE, with all these identity politics, would have been interested in the race and nationality of the students doing that? If the students doing it were white, do you think that would have mattered? I think it would have. Why is that? Because the investigation would have been into racial discrimination. Can you discriminate against somebody if you're part of the same race? Probably not. If it was black students harassing black students, it would not be discrimination, typically. Although you could say that they're not being very nice. Now, when it comes to this issue of, well, the students harassing Jewish students, is race and nationality and national origin also important? Probably. Because again, if it's Jewish students harassing Jewish students, it's probably not discrimination. But if it's students from Arab countries, Turkey, Syria, Gaza, maybe it is. And if these people are from those countries and they're engaging in race-motivated attacks, is that a violation of American civil rights laws? Probably. Now, could they be deported? Maybe. That's the big question. Because again, you need a violation of law to back that in order to deport them. And it seems that some of these individuals have not been charged, but they're looking to deport them anyway. And that brings up debates on, well, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, protected under the Constitution. Where do you draw the line on it? That's where the current legal debate is. Now look, on to a different topic though. President Donald Trump detailed his wish list for secure American elections. He made these comments during remarks at the White House earlier this week. Watch this.
We have to straighten it out, and it's so easy to do it. And we should go to paper ballots. We should go to one-day voting. We should go to voter ID. And just one other thing, proof of a thing called citizenship in the United States. Wouldn't that be nice? How simple does that sound? Proof of citizenship, voter ID, one-day voting, and paper ballots. You know, paper ballots are very secure. They have watermark paper. It's very intricate stuff. It's very technologically advanced, even though it's paper. And you'd have no trouble. You wouldn't have dishonest elections, and you'd have them all done by 10 o'clock in the evening. You know, France went to that, and not that I want to copy anybody, but many others have also. And They had 38 million votes, and it was all done at 10 o'clock. They had a winner, they had a loser. That was it. Nobody was complaining.
Now, look, it's not clear whether Trump could actually enforce these requirements in the United States, but he has continued talking about election integrity. This is part of the big debate, right? And look, on this front, there were some new laws on elections passed. One of the big changes right now is the ban on ranked choice voting that's being done by several states. In fact, Just the News said this: Virginia and Wyoming are the latest two states to ban ranked choice voting, RCV, bringing the total number of states prohibiting the election system to 13 states. It says the battle over whether to implement or ban RCV has been ongoing for nearly a decade. However, more states have banned RCV or chosen not to use it than have implemented it. It says RCV is an election process, ranked choice voting, whereby if no candidate receives more than 50% of the vote, then a runoff system is triggered. When voters cast their ballots, they rank each candidate in order of first to last. If no candidate reaches the 50% plus one vote threshold, you got to get 51%, then the candidate with the least amount of first choice votes is eliminated. Then second choice votes from those who voted for the last place finisher are reallocated among the remaining candidates and tallied, and a process that says that continues until a candidate receives the majority of the vote. Now, you could argue with this, it helps third parties, right? A lot of people are not necessarily Republican or Democrat. There's a lot of gray area, and there's some kind of very deep areas too, if you're on the extremes of it. A lot of people, among conservatives, there are some who might be more Tea Party. There are some who might be more libertarian. There are some who might be part of other parties, the Independence Party or whatever. On the left, there's the Green Party. There's the Socialist Party, Democrat Socialists. There are others, talks even of, for example, third parties being formed. Now, the issue a lot of people have is they do not want to vote for third parties because they say, well, look, they're not going to win. They're probably not going to win. It's very hard to vote for a third party candidate and expect that candidate to actually win an election. And so people, if you vote for a third party, it's oftentimes a symbolic vote. I have friends who are libertarians and they vote libertarian and they're like, yeah, I know it's not going to do anything. I know that my favorite candidate is not going to win. But, we're a democratic republic. You got to vote, and I'm going to vote for the person I want, even if I don't think they can win. Now, what does ranked choice voting do? If you have it so that the third parties split the vote, which is, one of the arguments a lot of people make. When Trump was, again, on the campaign trail and he was talking to the libertarians, he's saying, look, you can vote for the guy who's going to lose, or you can vote for me. Who are you going to vote for? A lot of the Democrats, they criticize the third parties. They, in fact, blamed the Green Party for some of their losses, saying, look, if you guys weren't there, we would have won. If you weren't there, we would have won. Why don't you vote for me instead? Now, a lot of voters, because of this, they might vote for a party that they feel does not fully back their interests. And so they vote for the party that is probably going to win closest to what they want, even if it doesn't represent what they want. The argument for ranked choice voting is that if it's a split vote and it's below the threshold of 50% or 51%, it goes to a runoff and it's like a ranked thing, right? Process of elimination. And that means if there's, let's say, 51% votes between the Democrats and the Green Party, had they all voted Democrat, they probably would have won. If there's 51% votes on the Republican side, but, let's say 30% voted Republican, 10% voted, let's say Tea Party, 10% voted, Libertarian, and 1% somewhere else. They would have won if the vote was not split. And so the argument with ranked choice voting is, well, you go to a runoff so that people can still vote for third parties. The problem you have with that is it draws out the election process, and many people argue it brings in the risk of fraud or voters not voting in the second wave, right? Voter engagement might fall off and it causes additional problems. Some countries actually have election systems that function like that. In America, we don't detect, at least not at the federal level. Again, arguments on both sides of it, right? But now states are kind of moving away from it. Now, back to the point briefly of Donald Trump talking about reforms to the election system, even passing some orders on it, actually. This is going to start a big debate because it used to be the case that states decided most of the election system. States, and it used to be the state legislature. If you go by the Constitution, the state legislature basically decides how elections are run. That was overturned in 2020 under some of the lawsuits against, when they were saying election fraud and so on. Some of the cases overturned that. And now governors and the local judicial system, they have more authority, and the federal government has a lot more authority over the way elections are run. At the time, back in 2020 and 2021, a lot of Republicans were very unhappy about that. And the argument at that time was, well, strict reading of the Constitution, state legislatures decide the rules for the elections. If you go by a strict reading, I would agree that is the case. The issue with that, as many brought up, was that at state legislature level, it's kind of more red. Republicans would basically be able to dictate the rules for the elections. That was overturned largely through some of the lawsuits. The effect of that was that the federal government now has a lot more authority over the way states run their elections. Republicans used to be very unhappy about it, and now they're probably very happy about it. And Donald Trump now has a lot more authority over that because of some of those lawsuits back in 2020 and 2021. Interesting kind of boomerang swing that got, right? Now look, folks, in other news, though, the taxpayer-funded programs to give free housing to illegal immigrants, something many people said was not happening, turns out it was happening, and it's now been brought to an end by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is the secretary of that, Scott Turner, and here's the official press release on the ending of free houses for illegal immigrants. This is the official page of HUD. It says U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, Secretary Scott Turner, and U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, today signed the American Housing Program for American Citizens. What a concept. This is a memorandum of understanding to end the wasteful misappropriation of taxpayer dollars, it says, to benefit illegal aliens instead of American citizens. Now look, a lot of people said this was never happening. That's a big conspiracy theory. The law prevents this. It turns out it was happening and you were being lied to. But it says as part of this new agreement, HUD will provide a full-time staff member to assist in operations at the Incident Command Center, the ICC, establishing an interagency partnership to facilitate data sharing and ensure taxpayer-funded housing programs are not used to harbor or benefit illegal aliens. It says, according to recent data from the Center for Immigration Studies, about 59% of illegal alien households use one or more welfare programs. 59%, creating roughly $42 billion in costs. Across the country, there are about 9 million residents of public and subsidized housing without proper information sharing to determine eligibility status. It notes that under the Biden administration, states and localities introduced legislation to ban illegal aliens from public housing. And it says, in addition to the American Housing Programs for American Citizens, this is the, again, new announcement on this, HUD, through its Office of Public and Indian Housing, PIH, instructed moving to work, MTW, public housing authorities, and there's a lot of acronyms here, to comply with Section 214 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1980, prohibiting HUD-funded services providers from providing financial assistance to illegal immigrants. Now, I'd say there's a bit of gray area there, and here's where it is. Basically, under U.S. law, illegal immigrants are not supposed to be eligible for welfare or other programs like this. And if you debated with lawyers or anybody in the past, they would have told you that. They would have said it's a big conspiracy theory that's illegal under U.S. law. If you try to claim illegal aliens are getting welfare or unemployment or free houses or whatever else, you're a big conspiracy theorist because the law prohibits that from happening. That's what you would have been told in the past. It turns out a lot of them are getting it, around 59% that we even know of. And as that press release notes, households again, and as that press release notes, it's been costing taxpayers a whole lot of money, in the tens of billions of dollars at least threshold. Now here's where the gray area is. The big gray area is that many illegal immigrants were being given pseudo-legal status. There was a loophole at play. They were being given parole. They were being given, because of the way the amnesty system works, a lot of the NGOs or nonprofit organizations were coaching people as they were crossing the border. They were coaching them on what to say in order to get on the amnesty list. They were gaming the amnesty list. Many of them were discarding their identities, getting rid of their driver's licenses, getting rid of their passports. If you've watched my videos where I've gone to the Mexico side of the U.S. border, I've shown you actual videos. The ground on the other side of the Rio Grande is covered in documents, again, driver's licenses, identity cards, passports, travel documents. And why do they do that? It's because they need to lie about their identities if they want to game the system. A lot of them, for example, they might come from a country where they would be eligible for amnesty, but they were living in like Chile for the past 10 years. Their documents would show that. They have to get rid of their documents in order to lie to American authorities to get on these programs. And that's what a lot of them were doing. Now on that front, the effect of it was people who would not normally be eligible for taxpayer-funded programs, welfare, again, taxpayer-subsidized housing, free food, everything. A lot of them got this because, again, they were given pseudo-legal status through a manipulated loophole. This was used on a massive scale for these individuals. But I'd actually add to this too, a lot of illegal immigrants also get social welfare. I personally know some. I've mentioned, actually, I have a very mixed race family. I have family members who are illegal immigrants by extension. Some of them get government services. I know this firsthand because I know people like this. They get it. I don't know how they get it, but they do. But of course, there's other arguments that some of them might, game the systems on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and a lot of other things. And it also changes depending on which state you're in, because some states even authorize them to get, free medical services and everything else like that. Or the states mandate that they're not allowed to ask for citizenship when they grant these programs. And so even if it's illegal on paper, it is being manipulated and, again, taken advantage of on a massive scale. Now, folks, in some other news, 23andMe, this is one of those ancestry data companies. You can give them your DNA. They tell you about your ancestry. 23andMe is going bankrupt. And there are now warnings that if you don't want your data getting sold off, you should probably delete it. I'll be talking more about this after we go back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. If you've used 23andMe to find your ancestry data, you might want to quickly delete your data. Now look, the company is going bankrupt, and there are now warnings that the DNA data of that company, which might include your data, could get sold off. Who's going to buy it? Well, we'll find out. But look, this is the California Attorney General Rob Bonta giving the alert on this, saying this, quote, California Attorney General Rob Bonta today issued a consumer alert to customers of 23andMe, a genetic testing and information company. It says the California-based company has publicly reported that it is in financial distress and stated in securities filings there is substantial doubt about its ability to continue as a going concern. Due to the trove of sensitive consumer data, your DNA, 23andMe has amassed. Attorney General Bonta reminds Californians, and everybody else out there, by the way, of their right to direct the deletion of their genetic data under the Genetic Information Privacy Act and California Consumer Privacy Act. It says Californians who want to invoke these rights can do so by going to 23andMe's website. Now, you don't need to be from California to use that service. Let me tell you how to do it. If you've used 23andMe, you can go on their site, log into your account, you go to your account settings under the Delete Data section. There's a section called 23andMe Data under your settings. Delete Data is under there. Delete your data, and I would encourage it as well. On those points as well, one of the big concerns with some of these ancestry apps, I'm not talking about Ancestry.com, just saying these ancestry discovery apps, some of them process your DNA data in Chinese labs anyway, which raises some additional concerns on, well, delete it now, but maybe your data's already been given off, unless some of them, for example, let you opt out of that. I know Ancestry.com, you can actually opt out of some of the data sharing. I don't know if all of them do, but I know that one does at least. Now, folks, on another topic, HHS Secretary, the guy now in charge of your food and medicine, RFK Jr., he has unveiled a brand new tool that you can use to find out whether there are harmful chemicals in the various food products you or your family may consume. You're curious about that cereal? You're curious about that bag of chips? Well, you can now go to their official site and use their tool to find out what's in it and whether it's going to hurt you. Now, here's the official release on the FDA website. It says this. Today, under the leadership of U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, unveiled the Chemical Contaminants Transparency Tool, CCT tool. It says an online searchable database providing a consolidated list of contaminant levels, e.g., for example, tolerances, action levels, and guidance levels that are used to evaluate potential health risks of contaminants in human food. And notes this. Chemical contaminants include a broad range of chemical substances that may be present in food that have the potential to cause harm. And here's a quote. HHS is committed to radical transparency, the new catchphrase of the Trump administration, radical transparency, to give Americans authentic, informed consent. What a concept, informed consent about what they are eating, said Secretary Kennedy. And he adds, quote, this new chemical contaminants transparency tool is a critical step for industry to make America healthy again. It says the CCT tool, which provides contaminant levels, is in one location, it says, for ease of searching, is one of the outcomes of the FDA's initiative to modernize food chemical safety. The consolidated list includes the contaminant name, commodity, contaminant level, again, all these different things on it, and also when it comes to reference codes, that's federal regulations and so on. And notes the list can also be filtered by contaminant type. If you're concerned about a particular contaminant, maybe a food dye, maybe a type of seed oil, you can actually search and possibly find out what foods have that. It probably doesn't have every food on earth, but probably a lot of them because this is part of the FDA website. And they do review this stuff, right? It says The FDA will continue to monitor the food supply by testing foods through several different programs. And under Secretary Kennedy's leadership, the FDA, it says, is committed to promoting radical transparency to make sure all Americans know what is in their food and make America healthy again. Now, on that point, RFK Jr. on the campaign trail, because remember, he's had quite the journey. He started off as a Democratic presidential candidate running against Biden. He was not allowed to be involved in the primaries. Biden was the incumbent. That's normal. He ran as an independent, third party, lost, and again, Trump then appointed him to be part of the Trump administration, now in charge of HHS, Health and Human Services. Now, on the campaign trail, Kennedy was talking about a pretty big plan. He had named at least 100 chemicals, harmful chemicals that he wanted to ban. A lot of these include, food dyes and seed oils and that kind of thing. He's been talking about this for kind of a long time. He's talked about issues he believes there are with medications in the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry. They're talking about banning pharmaceutical ads for television, yet again, which used to be illegal, now it's legal. Maybe they'll also ban it for politicians, which used to be illegal too, but it's no longer illegal. They're talking about this kind of stuff. Now that he's in charge of HHS, a lot of people say, well, where's the bans? Whatever happened to banning those food dyes? This is the context of that. They're doing an investigation. It's going to be about 3 months while the investigation is being carried out. And after that is done, within that time frame, meaning it might not be that long, right? It might be shorter than that. Then they're going to do the action steps. I think a lot of people are saying, well, geez, why is it taking so long? Folks, we're like a month and a half into the Trump administration. It's moving pretty fast, but we're only like a month and a half in. So he is still moving on those things. He's still talking about it, and he is taking some steps. I would say the interesting thing with this database, working through the FDA as a searchable database for it, is if the FDA database would tell you that there are harmful contaminants, what is the role of the FDA? It's to make sure there are no harmful contaminants in your food. And so if the FDA is acknowledging that there exist harmful contaminants, then will they ban them? I believe this is a first step towards that. This is more of a public information campaign, but I do believe that by acknowledging the presence of harmful contaminants, this will very likely open the door for FDA, and again, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to begin reviewing that and maybe carry out action. I do think we will see a lot of these get banned eventually. Now, on another news, folks, Trump recently announced plans to significantly reduce the size of the Department of Education. He's even saying eventually get rid of it and to begin handing over more authority of education to the states, making it so that states run the education system. Your public school is your local state school. People have said, well, what about Pell Grants and things like that? They're still going to have that. Anyone saying otherwise is lying to you, frankly. They're still having that. The DOE is continuing in a very minimal role, maintaining just those basic services. The programs that give money for kids in need and stuff like that. Now, part of this was announced in the appointment of Secretary of Education Linda McMahon. And in a new White House video, she explains the new vision for the Department of Education. Watch this.
I've been asked why in the world I would want to be the secretary of a department that is going to be done away with, and I'm actually firing myself.
We're pleased to be joined today by the woman who I chose because she's an extraordinary person, and hopefully she will be our last Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. Linda, you're presiding over something that's so important, and you're going to do a fantastic job, just like you have your whole life. She's had nothing but success. So hopefully you won't be there too long, but we're going to find something else for you, Linda, okay?
We both believe very much that education should be tailored to communities, that parents should have involvement, that local superintendents are the ones working with our teachers with full transparency of what education curriculum should be. The President signed an executive order to shut down the Department of Education and have me be the last secretary of the Department of Education. The President made very clear that Pell Grants funding for students with special needs, all of those would continue. But he does believe that we'll be able to operate more efficiently by governors and state departments of education, and superintendents and parents can certainly have more input into the education of their students. I believe that as well.
Look, as most of the country is now finding out, the Department of Education is kind of new. It's not that old. It was created by former President Jimmy Carter. That was only in 1979. The DOE was only established in 1980. And since then, what's been the effect, folks? What has been the effect of the Department of Education? How has education gone? Well, we would assume that all this big focus, the war on poverty, the movement to educate our kids, to care about our children, what has been the effect? Well, since the establishment of the Department of Education in 1980, we watched literacy rates go like this. We've seen a massive decline in education in the United States. Trump noted it is failing. Maybe it's already failed. You have kids graduating with honors in high school who are illiterate. They cannot read, and they're graduating from high school. You have kids who do not even learn basic math. I'm not even talking about like advanced math, basic math, and they're graduating. What is the education department doing? That's the big question right now. Now, you could blame this on additional programs, no child left behind. It's impossible to fail. You could blame it on Common Core education and the reforms they made to the education system, making it more federal run, which took more power away from the states and more power away from individual teachers. You could blame it on the programs that made it so that teachers, as I mentioned, aren't really able to teach as they want to. You have a lot of fantastic teachers out there, and they don't have the freedom to actually teach different topics in various ways. You could blame it on overcrowding. You can blame it on video games and movies, which actually I would say that probably has impacted the quality of education. If you were to ask me, it's probably a bit of all of these. It's probably a bit of all of the above. I don't think it's fully fair to blame the failures in education just on the education department. I would actually say that if you look at the changes in kids and the distractions they have, there are quite a few. Social media, smartphones, video games, nonstop movies, Netflix, where we can binge watch entire series of shows in a single sitting. And don't lie to me, I know some of you have done it too. This did not exist in the past. This did not exist in the past. And I would say kids are dealing with an onslaught of entertainment and distractions which was not previously there. Now, that being said, I also believe that a large part of that is because of the education system. I think Common Core was a massive failure. I think it hurt kids. And I think the rewriting of American history and the politicization of education, where kids are being taught to hate the country, hate their history, hate their race, and kids are being taught comprehensive sex ed, where sex ed is even inserted into like math classes, because I don't know why they want to do that for some reason. I think the politicization of it and the taking of politics over basic literacy and basic reasoning has significantly damaged it. Others would argue it was designed like that from the get-go. The fact that the modern education system is based on the Prussian model, by the way, which was not about creating an educated and independent populace, but instead creating good factory workers, good little drones who can show up at a certain time, listen for the bell, go and do their drone work and go home. That was, of course, part of the Prussian model. They're not teaching you to be free-thinking individuals. They're teaching you to be office workers and factory workers. Now, some people would suggest that handing this back to the states would be the greatest model possible for fixing it. And also, maybe if you let the states handle it, you could also open the door for other schools, private education, maybe other forms of education, homeschool, other things like that, and begin deregulating the education system to allow kids to more tailor fit the way that they learn. Will that work better? Will it work worse? Well, we're going to find out. But I would say you can look at the rates of education, literacy, frankly, math compliance and efficiency of kids who do homeschool and private school versus the public school system, and I think you'll see the discrepancy. That said, we will see what happens. Some people argue this could actually hurt kids, especially in inner cities and so on. We're going to find out. Now, that said, folks, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. All right, let's see here. Wilma Eden, you're saying Elon Musk, should make them a new app, or at least upgrade the Signal app. You know, again, the elephant in the room, when we're talking about Signal, remember, like all these national security officials were talking on Signal about bombing the Houthis, because we're Americans. That's what we talk about on private communications. You know, the big conversation is that a secure channel? Is Signal secure? Technically, Signal does use military-grade encryption. Yes, it is secure. Does that mean it's 100% secure? Probably not. Probably not. If your phone is compromised, if your device is compromised, if you've made the mistake of installing an app that has backdoors to the Chinese Communist Party, I'm not going to name names here, but there's a lot of them. Yes, you could have compromised your device, and yes, you have not only the apps themselves, but you have what are called key loggers. As you're typing, the typing can get monitored. Some apps, you literally grant them access. Like when you say, yes, I understand on the terms of service, you can grant them access to your notes, your contact list, your audio recording, your video recording, meaning they can access your camera and actually monitor you and then sell that off to who knows whom. Then yes, you might have compromised yourself. But frankly, that's going to become just as big of an issue if you have a conversation in person. Unless you're, again, working on something very serious and you go to your, like, I don't know, safe room at the Pentagon and you leave your phone outside the room. That is the only way you're going to have a safe communication. That's like the only way. And anybody who's, worked in areas like this, like, if you go to secure locations, you're not allowed to bring your cell phone in. You have to leave your cell phone outside the room. I mentioned yesterday, I've actually got a tour one time of the Argus destroyer, naval warship, the most advanced in the U.S. military. And I had to leave my cell phone outside the ship because the ship has electronic warfare systems that will literally destroy your cell phone if it detects like a foreign device on the ship. Like electronic warfare stuff is crazy when you get into the technicalities of it. In other words, if you're going to have government communications, nothing is safe. Email is not safe. Text messaging is not safe. You could argue that among all the unsafe communications, the safest would probably be Signal or in-person communication where you leave your cell phone outside the room. The problem is they're not going to have this conversation leaving your cell phone outside the room unless it's something involving really serious, really secret squirrel type stuff, meaning only certain levels of it would they bother with that at. And that's just the reality of it. Now, could they create a encrypted app for communications? If the government were to create an encrypted service for government communications, frankly, I think they should. Some of these programs involve open source. The problem you have with that is it could probably be hacked anyway. And the argument they would make is that public services, Signal, Wicker, private companies, in other words, that they have security reviews. The government, if they want to use it for communication, meaning they get government contracts, they're going to review the security and approve it. Certain devices are approved for government communications. They actually have an approval process for it. Do you remember when Obama became president back in 2008, and he was told that he could not use his BlackBerry phone? And there were a lot of stories around that because the BlackBerry was not an approved phone for government communications. Why was that? It's because it was not up to par of their standards. You have certain devices that get approved and they have to meet certain criteria. And many people would argue it's better to keep that in, again, private services, public companies like, Apple or whichever company runs Signal. Because by doing that, they need to keep their security up to date, and it's very expensive to run that. They would argue that having the government do this would probably not be as efficient as a publicly traded company or a major corporation. And sometimes the government devices might be slightly different. They might remove some of the third-party elements to it. They might remove some of the different services on it. I know, for example, some government computers, they're not going to have USB jacks. You can't plug a USB device into it because it's deemed a security threat, meaning their devices will have additional features sometimes, specifically for the security they need. And that's just the way it works. If Elon Musk were to make a secure communication app, he would also need to make a smartphone. And that's what he would have to do in order to fulfill the full breadth of what they would need for this. If you're going to have real secure communications, you need to have the whole spectrum of it. And I would actually argue the phone itself is a greater security risk than an app like Signal. The phone itself is more likely to have embedded problems than the actual app being installed. On that note also, you have chip-level security threats. They would call these embedded threats. And this is where you get into what they call supply chain risks. At the chip level of your phone, all right, so when you're using your phone, you're interacting with what they call software, right? The surface level of a device, your iOS, right? The operating system, you're dealing with software. The apps you install, those are software. You can use them. You can change them depending on which one you buy. That's surface level stuff. There's another layer that you cannot change. It's embedded at the chip level. You call that firmware. You can update firmware. There's some things to it, but some of that is not even accessible. And there are chip level threats from some countries. I've exposed some of this coming from China, actually. Some of the Chinese smartphones, if you buy a Chinese smartphone, there are chip-level threats, firmware-level threats. And those are what you call embedded threats. You cannot get rid of them. Even if you delete everything on your phone, even if you factory reset it, you cannot change it. And if you want to get into real security, that is a significantly worse thing than using Signal for communications. If you want to talk about security, they should be focusing on that. Martin McKenzie, another question here. You're saying if citizens band together to protect their rights and or property, will they be considered terrorists? If so, the word is losing its meaning. There's two ways to look at this, all right? He's saying if citizens band together to protect their rights and or property, will they be considered terrorists? There's a few sides to this. On one side, okay, look, it depends on the degree to which you're talking about that. If you and your best friends want to come together to protect your community, there are legal ways to do it and there are illegal ways to do it. The legal way to do it, the most common one, would be a community watch, right? You might have seen that. I don't know if they still have them. You ever been to neighborhoods and they have, this is a community watch neighborhood, and they have this sign and it's like the guy in a trench coat and the hat, right? You ever see that? Community watch. There are some communities that have community watch, meaning the neighbors have made an agreement among themselves to watch for people who should not be in that community, and they profile them and they call the police. The reason you kind of don't see that anymore is because it did in some cases lead to racial profiling. Hey, there's a suspicious individual. I don't think he lives here. You're calling the police. Please send a police officer to come and talk to this individual. The police officer has to go talk to him and say, what are you doing here? Why are you here? What's your name? It's a legal gray area, which is why I think you don't see it so much anymore. It led to some racial profiling, let's say. I know police officers who've told me that they've been called for stuff like that. Racial profiling does exist with that, which is why I think you don't see it as much and why they created some laws on it. you used to have the ability of, stop and frisk. Police they can't like put their hands in your pockets, but they can pat you down for a gun or something. There is stuff like that. They frisk you, they don't search you, which is the legal gray area with that as well. Now, there are other gray areas with this. The forming of a militia, right? You can form a militia. I'm not getting into this territory too much. I'm not telling you to go form a militia, but the Constitution does allow you to do this. And there are a lot of public movements, I'd say at the political level, trying to go after militias. A lot of people would argue, if you go by the Constitution, there are debates on this. Can you and your best friends and your neighbors form a militia among yourselves? According to the Constitution, yes, you can. Yes, you can. According to many people on the gun debate, no, you can't, because they argue that the militias are only in regards to the National Guard. They say a militia is the state-level military. That's not really true legally, which is why we still have militias. But there are legal arguments trying to change that. And so if you're talking about community watch, militia, those are ways you can legally band together to defend your rights and protect your communities. Those do exist. Now, the illegal side of that, the first one would be gangs. A lot of gangs, street gangs, actually start off like this. A lot of gangs actually begin as people forming among themselves organizations to fight other gangs. And, the Bloods and the Crips started like that. I can't remember which one came first, but one of the gangs was terrorizing communities. The other gang started as a way to fight that gang because they believed that the police could not do enough to stop the gang violence. What happened? You had another gang start up. A lot of times gangs are formed that way. A lot of prison gangs begin like that. It's people form among themselves an organization to defend themselves and defend people of their race. A lot of gangs are race-based. And what happens? Well, they end up becoming gangs. Sometimes they end up becoming worse gangs. And so that is one of the problems you get when it comes to vigilantism. Sometimes the vigilantes become a criminal organization in and of themselves. That is one of the risks with that. The other thing you have when you have people forming among themselves organizations to protect themselves is you sometimes get mob violence. And this is where you get problems of, communal justice, which could also lead to lynchings. And some people would argue that communal justice, you've been found guilty for committing a crime by the people of your community, and they carry out justice based on their understanding of law. That's why that's typically not allowed. That is to an extent. Now, the problem we have in the country when you get to vigilante justice, you do have the right to self-defense in some states. Some states don't allow that. In some states, they have, for example, castle doctrine. You're allowed to defend your home. Some states have it so that if a person tries harming you, you're allowed to defend yourself, sometimes including with lethal force. Different states have different laws on this. Some states, though, do not. And so, if you were to ask me, I think the right to self-defense is a fundamental right that all lives are bestowed with. I would say that even bugs have the means of self-defense. Every animal on the face of the planet, as far as I know, has some ability of self-defense, whether it's claws or talons or stingers or, teeth. Even insects have tools for self-defense. Everything does. Humans, of course, we have tools of self-defense as well. We call them weapons or our fists or our mean words, right? Humans are given tools of self-defense as well, but because people sometimes misuse that, there are limits on the use of them. If you were to ask me, I believe in self-defense. I also believe in the idea of turning the other cheek, and I'd say think about long-term consequence. it's not that big of a deal. Don't get caught up in the passion of the moment. It's a mistake a lot of people make. Do not get caught up in the passion of the moment. I do believe there are limits to that. For example, if you're being terrorized by gangs or crazy things like that. I would also say, though, that under normal circumstances, that is why we form among ourselves government. That is partly why government exists. We create a system of security for which to protect our rights, our property, and our lives. Which, if you go by the Founding Fathers, is the very purpose of government, right? The reason we have legal systems, the reason we have police, is because we've established systems of laws that do not get caught up in the passion of the moment. And they're able to mitigate, able to become mediators to handle our conflicts, basically. That's the reason the court system exists. That's the reason we have these things. The problem a lot of Americans have now is that for a long time, many people have felt that the systems of justice are not defending them properly, which is where you get to these, light on crime judges, which is where you get to racial-based justice and all these other crazy things we've witnessed, or the revolving door, where people under certain ages cannot be held really fully to account, and you have people who do terrible things and don't really get punished for it. I do personally believe that the tides are turning. I do believe that proper justice is returning. I have nothing against self-defense, but I would also urge people to think about long-term consequences. And really, it's not that big of a deal sometimes. People kill each other for really stupid reasons sometimes. Personally, I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. I very much believe in the right to bear arms and these types of things. I've also had conversations with police where they've told me kind of the other side of it. They've told me, yeah, I love the Second Amendment, but they're like, I've seen people shoot each other over the stupidest reasons you can imagine. And I understand that when you witness that, you might believe a little bit otherwise. People killing each other because someone cut them off on the freeway or something like that. Or people, firing into a car and killing a child sitting in the front seat because they get road rage, like stupid things like that. And when you deal with that level of stuff, you got to understand that I agree with self-defense, but not everybody has good judgment when it comes to weight, let's say weight of punishment. And I do believe that's why we formed among ourselves systems to mediate these conflicts, which are the court systems and police. Limits to it, I don't believe either extreme is good. I'm very moderate when it comes to this, but I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. Foggy01, you're saying, notice the media hasn't said anything about the egg cost, down by almost 50%. Yeah, they're not doing that. That's just the way the media works. I do personally think Americans are becoming a bit numb to the constant, I'm offended by everything news coverage. Everything that happens is the greatest scandal that has ever happened, that type of news coverage. Every day, the greatest scandal you've ever seen has unfolded yet again. People have been told this for the past 10 years. I think prior to Trump, it wasn't so much like that. You did have, Obama administration, a lot of the conservative media were very concerned about him, but it wasn't on the level we saw when Trump became president. For the past 10 years, people have heard the greatest possible volume of being screeched in their ears nonstop. Every single story is the greatest scandal to have ever taken place. Everything is about impeachment. Everything is about government. This government official should be removed from their position. It's the greatest scandal that has ever befallen us. You've seen fake stories. You've seen false testimony. You've seen people framing things and falsifying hate crimes. And you've seen the journalists every single day using the highest volume of labels. This person is a Nazi. This person is a white supremacist. This person is the greatest threat to our democracy who has ever lived. you can only keep things at full maximum volume for so long before everything else is washed out. If you make everything the biggest thing that has ever happened, there's no spectrum of argument anymore. You know what I mean? Like, if you meet a person and everything that happens is the biggest thing that has ever happened, you're probably not going to take them very seriously when they tell you the biggest thing that's ever happened again today. If a person is very moderate, it gives a lot more room to fluctuate on the degree of seriousness. And it's those types of people who tend to be deemed more credible. A lot of the media, I believe, has lost its credibility because they stopped doing that. Everything is painted in the extremes. And when everything is an extreme, there's no room for moderate discussion. When you lose moderate discussion, you lose truth. You lose trust. And people just stop listening to you. And I think that's where we're at right now, you know what I mean? Which is why on Crossroads on this show, I do try to give you all both sides. I do try to show you what's happening, but I also try to show you like context, which is why I pull up a lot of like older articles and older debates to kind of show how this thing developed. I believe that context is important because it helps you weigh the degree of seriousness of an issue and whether it's just people overreacting to things. That's the way I try to do this show. All right, folks, that said, thank you so much for joining me. Join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I'll see you then. Please like this video. Give us a share. It helps us a lot. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.